The road back from a funeral always feels longer than the road there. Cole Harlan had made that ride more times than he cared to count, through mountain passes and flatlands, through rain, and punishing summer heat with grief, sitting behind him like a passenger he couldn't shake. But this one felt different. This one sat heavier. Maybe because Denny Pruitt had been riding beside him for 22 years, and now there was just empty road where Denny used to be. Maybe because at 48, Cole was starting to count the empty spaces more than the filled ones. He roadie alone. That was deliberate. Slab had offered to come, and so had two other Iron Ridge brothers, but Cole had waved them off the night before with a look that didn't invite argument. Grief for Cole Harlan was not a group activity. It never had been. The Tennessee morning had started gray and stayed that way. Clouds pressed low against the hills like they were listening in. Cole kept Route 9 beneath his wheels for no particular reason, except that it was familiar and quiet, the kind of road that asked nothing of you. Farmland stretched wide on both sides, broken up by tree lines and the occasional rusted fence post, and the air smelled like cut grass and distant rain. His Harley moved through all of it like a dark rumor, steady and unhurried. I hadn't eaten since the night before. He hadn't slept much either. What he had done in the long, still hours before dawn was sit in the parking lot of a motel outside Clarksville and stare at his own reflection in the side mirror of his bike. He'd looked at that face, the deep lines, the gray threaded through the beard, the eyes that had seen 30 years of things most people would never see, and asked himself a question he hadn't been able to answer. What was the point of all of it? Not in a desperate way, not in a way that scared him, just in the honest, flat-footed way that comes when a man gets old enough to start doing the math. Denny was gone, three others before him in the last 5 years. And Cole Harlan was still riding, still showing up, still moving through the world with the Iron Ridge patch on his back. But lately he wasn't sure what he was moving toward. Just movement. Just the road. The road had always been enough before. He wasn't sure when it had stopped being enough, only that it had, and the not knowing felt like something important he'd misplaced and couldn't find in the dark. He spotted Hatcher's gas and feed from a quarter-mile out. It wasn't much to look at. A single pump out front, a low building with a metal roof gone soft with rust, hand-painted signs in the windows, advertising lottery tickets and cold drinks and live bait. The gravel lot needed filling in. A wooden bench sat beside the front door with one leg shorter than the others, and whoever had tried to fix it had given up halfway through. A row of soda machines hummed along the exterior wall, their logos bleached by years of Tennessee sun. Cole pulled in not because he needed gas, but because his body needed to stop moving for a while. His back had been talking to him since Clarksville, and the cold coffee he'd had at the motel had long since stopped doing any good. He killed the engine and sat for a moment, letting the quiet settle around him, listening to the tick of cooling metal and the low whistle of wind moving through the tall grass at the edge of the lot. He swung off the bike slowly. The gravel shifted under his boots. He rolled his shoulders and heard things creak that probably shouldn't creak anymore. And he thought about Denny, who had always said that a man's body starts filing complaints the day he turns 40 and doesn't stop until the day he dies. Denny had said a lot of things like that. Funny things that held sadness inside them if you pressed too hard. Cole pushed through the front door. A small bell announced him. The man behind the counter, 50s, heavy-set with a John Deere cap and reading glasses parked on top of his head, looked up from a racing form and gave Cole the kind of look that men in small towns give to bikers they don't recognize. Not hostile, not welcoming. Somewhere in the middle where caution lives. Cole nodded. The man nodded back. Transaction complete. He moved through the narrow aisles, picking up a bottle of water and a pack of crackers, and was reaching for a cup of coffee from the machine in the corner when he first saw the boy. He almost missed him. The boy was sitting on the concrete curb just outside the side window, close enough that Cole could see him clearly through the glass. Small, even for what Cole guessed was 9 or 10 years old, wearing jeans that were a size too big rolled at the ankle, and a jacket the color of a faded sky. His dark hair needed cutting. His sneakers had been white once a long time ago. He sat with a brown paper bag balanced on his knees, both hands resting on top of it, and he was looking at something just out of Cole's line of sight. Cole shifted position to see what the boy was looking at. Sitting beneath the narrow overhang at the far end of the building was a man who looked like he'd been worn down to the essential. He was somewhere in his 60s, though. Hard living had a way of adding years to a face that hadn't been earned on a calendar. His clothes were layered flannel over a thermal canvas jacket, over that all of it stained and faded in ways that told a long story. His boots had been resoled at least once and were starting to need it again. His hands rested in his lap, and even from a distance, Cole could see the slight tremor in his fingers. The boy opened the paper bag. He did it carefully, like the contents mattered. He reached in and pulled out a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, a small apple, and a juice box, the kind with the short straw attached to the side. He placed each item beside the older man with a quiet deliberateness that struck Cole as strange coming from someone that young. Not performative, not seeking praise, just careful, just done right. The older man accepted each item with a small nod. He didn't speak. The boy didn't speak. They seemed to have moved past the need for words a while ago. Cole stood at the coffee machine and didn't pour his coffee. He watched the boy stand, fold the empty paper bag into a neat square, and tuck it into his jacket pocket. Then the boy walked around the corner of the building and was gone, headed toward the road. Cole looked back at the older man who had already begun unwrapping the sandwich with the careful reverence of someone who understood scarcity. He ate slowly. His eyes stayed low. Cole poured his coffee, paid for his things, sat on the bench outside with the short leg and drank slowly and thought about what he'd just seen and why it had caught in him the way it had. There was something in the ritual of it, the practice placement of each item, the folded bag, the silence that wasn't awkward but earned, that suggested this was not the first time, that this had been happening long enough for both parties to have settled into the shape of it. I told himself it was nothing, just a kid doing a kind thing. He rode on. He came back the next day. He told himself he needed gas, which was almost true. He pulled in at 3:10 and sat on his bike near the pump and waited, though he didn't admit to himself that he was waiting. At 3:15, the boy appeared from around the bend in the road where the school bus stop sign leaned at an angle. Same jacket, same jeans, same careful walk. He was carrying the brown paper bag again, and it had the same weight to it as the day before. The older man was already there, sitting in the same place under the overhang. He had been there before the boy arrived, which told Cole something about the arrangement. This was not a chance encounter. This was a scheduled one. The same ritual played out. Sandwich apple juice box. Careful placement. Small nod. No words. Cole watched from across the lot and noticed things he hadn't caught the day before. The boy moved with a kind of economy, nothing wasted, everything purposeful. And when he handed over the sandwich, he held it with both hands, not one. Like he was making sure the transfer was complete. Like he was making sure it landed safely. When the boy left, Cole sat for another few minutes before starting his engine. He wasn't sure what he was trying to figure out exactly. He only knew that something about what he'd seen didn't add up the way it should, and Cole Harlan had spent a lifetime noticing when things didn't add up. The boy's jacket was thin for October. The sneakers were too far gone, and there was something in the way he moved, a kind of careful conservation of energy that Cole recognized without being able to immediately name. He came back a third time. On the third day, he arrived at 3 o'clock. He bought a coffee and stood near the side window and watched the road. At 3:15, the boy came around the bend. Cole moved to the door. He waited until the exchange was done, until the boy had placed the food beside the older man, and stood to leave before he pushed out through the glass door and walked across the lot toward the curb. The boy heard his boots on the gravel and turned. I didn't run. Cole gave him credit for that. Most kids would have taken one look at 6'4" of leather and beard and made a fast decision to be somewhere else. But this boy held his ground, though he gripped the folded paper bag tighter, and his eyes went wide and watchful. He stood the way certain kids learn to stand, weight balanced, chin up slightly, ready to hold a position they'd chosen. Cole stopped a few feet away and kept his voice low and even. That's a good thing you're doing. The boy said nothing. He gave a small nod, the kind that doesn't commit to anything. You do this every day. Another nod. Cole glanced at the older man who was watching from under the overhang with eyes that were tired but sharp. He held Cole's gaze without flinching, which told Cole something about who he'd been before all this. "What's your name?" Cole asked the boy. A pause, then quietly, "Levi." "I'm Cole." He didn't offer the road name. Ridge was for brothers. "That your lunch you're giving away." Levi's jaw tightened slightly. He looked down at his sneakers. "It's fine," the boy said. "I'm not that hungry." Cole had heard those exact words before. He'd heard them from his mother when he was young, sat across a dinner table with 3 kids and not enough on it. He'd heard them from brothers who were hurting and didn't want to admit it. He knew what those words actually meant and what they cost to say. He crouched down slowly, bringing himself to eye level. Up close, he could see what distance had hidden. The boy's collarbone pressed against the fabric of his jacket. His cheeks had the slightly hollow look of someone not getting enough. His eyes were intelligent and careful in the way that children's eyes get when they've been carrying something too long, bright, with awareness but shadowed underneath, like a room with good lighting and no heat. "Levi," Cole said, "why are you giving away your food?" The boy's throat moved. His eyes went bright for a moment, the way eyes do just before they fill, and then he blinked and pressed it back down with a discipline that had no business being in a 10-year-old's face. "Because if I don't," Levi said quietly, "he won't eat at all." Cole stayed crouched and let that sit between them for a moment. "And what about you?" he asked. Levi shrugged, a small, tight movement. "I'm okay." Cole looked at the boy's hands, small, clean, thin at the wrist, in a way that wasn't just how kids were built. Then he stood. He walked into Hatcher's and spent $40 on everything the store had that a kid could eat without a kitchen. Granola bars, crackers, peanut butter packets, beef jerky, chocolate milk in small cartons, fruit cups with the pull-top lids. He carried it all outside in a doubled-up plastic bag and set it on the curb beside Levi. "This is for you," Cole said. "Not for sharing, for you." Levi stared at the bag, then at Cole. Something moved across his face. Gratitude tangled up with something that looked almost like pain, the specific pain of being seen when you've been working hard to stay invisible. "I can't take that." "You can." "Heck needs heck." Cole turned toward the older man. "Is that your name?" The man under the overhang looked up from his sandwich. His voice came out low and rough, like a door that hadn't been opened in a while. "What people call me." Cole picked up 2 of the granola bars and a bottle of water he'd included and walked them over. He held them out without ceremony. Heck Waverly looked at the offering, then at Cole. A long look, measuring and careful, the kind that has nothing to do with suspicion and everything to do with a man who has learned that things offered freely usually come with terms. Then he took them slowly with both hands. "Appreciate it," Heck said. The 2 words carried more weight than they should have, pressed down by everything that wasn't being said around them. Cole pulled the bench out from the wall and sat on the end of it, elbows on his knees, and looked at Heck directly. "Where are you sleeping?" "Around. Overpass on Route 9. A slight pause. "Sometimes." Cole nodded. He didn't push it. He turned back to Levi, who had sat down on the curb and was holding a chocolate milk carton without opening it, like he wasn't sure he was allowed. "Open it," Cole said. Levi opened it. Cole watched the boy drink and felt something tighten in his chest that he didn't have a clean name for. He'd ridden through 30 years of hard living. He'd sat with dying men and stood at the edge of things that couldn't be taken back. He'd thought he had a pretty complete inventory of the ways the world could break a person. He was being reminded that the list was longer than he'd cataloged. "Your mom know you're doing this?" Cole asked. Levi shook his head. "She'd be upset." "Why?" "Because she works really hard to make my lunch every morning." He said it simply, like a fact that required no elaboration, like he'd turned it over enough times that it had gone smooth. "She gets up at 5, before I'm even awake. She has the bag packed and in the fridge when I come down." Cole said nothing for a moment, letting the image settle. A woman rising in the dark to prepare food for a child she wouldn't see until midnight. The bag in the fridge, like a letter left on a kitchen table. The boy coming down in the morning and finding it and carrying it to someone else. She worked nearby. The diner on Millbrook in the morning, office cleaning at night. Levi took another sip of the milk. She doesn't get home until late. Sometimes I'm already asleep. Cole turned that over. A woman leaving before her child woke up and coming home after he slept. A boy in between navigating the long middle hours alone, making decisions that no 10-year-old should have to make, and making them quietly without complaint, without anyone knowing to ask. What about your dad? Levi's face went flat. Not sad exactly, more like a door closing on a room that hadn't been entered in a long time. He left. Cole didn't follow that thread. He'd pulled enough on threads like that to know what usually unraveled, and this wasn't the moment for it. He looked over at Heck again. The old man had finished the sandwich and was eating the apple in careful small bites, making it last. There was a practiced patience in the way he ate that went beyond simple hunger, the patience of a man who had learned to extend every good thing because the intervals between good things were long. How long you been out here? Heck, Heck considered the question with the same deliberateness he applied to everything. Few years. Before that, another long pause. Heck set the apple core down on the ground beside him. Then without a word, he pushed up the left sleeve of his flannel. The tattoo had faded to the color of an old bruise, but Cole could still read it. A unit insignia, the design worn soft by decades but still legible. Below it in plain block letters, Waverly. And below that a date from the early 90s. Cole looked at the tattoo. He looked at Heck's face. He saw a man who had gone somewhere at the government's request and come back carrying something the government hadn't given him a name for until years later, when the names started coming and the resources didn't follow fast enough to matter for the men who needed them most. He saw something else too, something that was harder to look at directly. I saw what happened when the support ran out and the years piled up and the distance between who you were and who you'd become got too wide to cross alone. He saw a man who had not failed but had been failed, and who had internalized the distinction so deeply that he could no longer tell the difference. Cole had his own distance. His was different in the details, but the same in the architecture. He'd spent 30 years building walls and calling it strength, and only in the last few, only in the quiet hours, in the empty parking lots, staring at his own reflection, had he started to understand what he'd kept out along with everything he'd tried to keep in. Gulf War, Cole asked quietly. Heck's chin moved slightly. Enough. Cole nodded once. He didn't say anything else about it. Some things you acknowledge and don't decorate. He turned back to Levi. The boy had finished the chocolate milk and was sitting with his knees pulled up, watching the two of them with eyes that were taking in more than a 10-year-old should probably have to take in. There was a quality to his attention, still undemanding, complete, that Cole had seen in much older people, and only in the ones who had learned that listening was a form of love. Levi, Cole said, what school do you go to? Millbrook Elementary. You go every day. Something shifted in the boy's face. Subtle, but Cole caught it. A small tightening the way a person's expression moves when they're calculating whether to tell the truth. Mostly, Levi said. Cole waited. He had learned a long time ago that silence used correctly was more effective than questions. The boy turned the empty carton in his hands. He bent the straw back and forth once, twice, a nervous gesture, and then he stopped. He seemed to make a decision in the way that people make decisions when they've been carrying something alone for too long and have finally found someone who seems like they might be able to hold the weight without dropping it. I got sent home this week, Levi said quietly. 3 days. Cole kept his voice neutral. What for? Taking food. Levi said it without looking up. From the lunch line. Extra stuff. I wasn't trying to steal it. I just thought. He stopped. Started again. Weekends are long, and Heck doesn't have anybody on weekends. Cole sat with that for a moment. A 10-year-old doing the arithmetic of someone else's hunger across a 7-day span and concluding that his own needs were the most adjustable variable in the equation. Does your mom know? Cole asked. No. The word came out small and careful. She can't know. She's got enough to worry about. What does she have to worry about? Levi was quiet for a moment. Cole thought the boy might close down, might decide he'd said enough. But there was something about having been listened to, really listened to without a phone in someone's hand, without someone already formulating the next thing to say, that had opened something up in the boy, and it hadn't finished opening. The company she cleans for, Levi said. The one at night. I heard her on the phone last week. He paused, turning the carton over in his hands. They're letting people go. She doesn't know I heard. Cole looked at the boy. 10 years old, sitting on a curb outside a gas station on Route 9, giving away the only full meal he had each day because a man beneath an overhang had no one else, hiding a school suspension because his mother had enough weight already, listening through walls to phone calls that weren't meant for him, and filing the information away like a small accountant of other people's disasters. Cole Harlan had known soldiers who carried less and called it a burden. He stood up from the bench. Stay here, he said. He didn't say it unkindly. He said it the way you say it to someone you intend to come back to. I walked to his bike. He stood beside it for a moment with his hand on the seat looking out at the road. A truck went by, slow, the driver not even glancing at the station. Just another vehicle on a familiar road passing without stopping because there was no reason to stop. Cole understood that completely. He had been that truck more times than he could count. I thought about Denny Pruitt. He thought about the last time he'd seen Denny alive at a rally outside Nashville 3 months before, laughing at something Cole couldn't even remember now. He thought about what Denny had said to him once years ago during a dark stretch when Cole had told him he didn't see the point of most things. Denny had looked at him and said without build-up, without preamble, the day you stop noticing people, Cole, is the day you're already gone. Cole had ridden past this gas station 4 times in the last month. He'd seen the overpass on Route 9 and whatever shape was underneath it, and kept moving because the road was pulling him forward, and there was always somewhere to be, and the world was full of things he'd learned not to let catch him. On the 5th time, something had made him pull in. He still didn't know what. But he was beginning to think that noticing the kind Denny had always meant the kind that cost something was not something you did with your eyes. It was something you did with the part of yourself you had to choose to keep open, and he had been letting that part go quiet for a very long time. He pulled out his phone and called Slab. Slab picked up on the second ring, which meant he was nearby, or had the phone in his hand, and with Slab it was probably both. Yeah, Slab said. I need you at Hatcher's Gas and Feed on Route 9. Cole kept his voice even. Bring the truck, whatever food we've got in the clubhouse. Clothes, too, if there are any. A pause, not a long one. Slab had ridden with Cole for 19 years and had developed a particular immunity to being surprised. How much we talking? Everything, Cole said. Give me 15. Cole hung up. He walked back to the curb and sat down again, this time on the ground beside Levi, his back against the brick wall. The boy looked at him sideways, uncertain about what came next. Cole pulled out the pack of crackers he'd bought earlier and opened it. He took one and held the pack out to Levi without comment. Levi took one, then another when Cole gestured that he should. They sat there, the two of them, eating crackers and not talking, while Heck finished his apple and the sun pushed through the clouds for the first time all afternoon. It wasn't much, just a thin, pale light, the kind that doesn't warm you through, but it changed the color of things, made the gravel look less gray, made the old brick of Hatcher's look almost amber, almost like something that had been there a long time and intended to keep being there. Cole watched Heck's hands, which had settled in his lap. The tremor was still there, but fainter now, and Cole recognized it for what it was, the body learning to be still after years of being unable to. 14 minutes later, the sound of an engine rolled into the lot. A pickup truck, dark blue, road-worn but solid, carrying 3 men who looked like they'd been assembled from spare parts and sheer will. Grady Boone's Slab came out first, tall and deliberate, his shaved head catching the afternoon light. Behind him came Stitch and Crow, both carrying cardboard boxes before they'd even fully cleared the truck doors. Levi pressed back against the wall. Cole put a hand on his shoulder, steady and unhurried. They're with me, he said. They're here to help. Slab crouched down in front of Levi with the unhurried ease of a large man who had learned long ago that moving slowly around people who had reason to be afraid was the only decent approach. He had a face that had been rearranged by time and questionable decisions, but his eyes were kind when he chose to use them that way, and right now he chose to. "Heard you've been holding things down out here," Slab said. "That takes something." Levi blinked. He didn't know what to do with being told that by someone who looked like Slab. Stitch set his box down. It was full of canned goods, soup, beans, corned tuna, along with pasta rice bread and a jar of peanut butter. "This is for your mom," he said to Levi, "so she's got something to work with." Crow added his box: cereal, oatmeal, dried fruit, a bag of apples. And on top, folded carefully, a jacket. Heavy canvas, deep green, lined, the kind built to last 5 winters without complaint. "Noticed yours is getting thin," Crow said simply. "Getting cold soon." Levi stared at the jacket, his lips pressed together. When he finally spoke, his voice had gone small and unsteady, in the way that voices go when the thing being felt is too large for the container available. "I don't know what to say." Cole, still sitting beside him on the ground, said, "You don't have to say anything." He looked over at Heck, who had been watching all of this from under the overhang, with an expression that moved through several things before settling into something that was not quite dignity and not quite grief, but lived in the same neighborhood as both. The expression of a man who had stopped expecting to be surprised by the world and was being surprised by it anyway. Cole stood and walked to Heck. He crouched to his level and looked the old man in the eye. "There's a VA center in Nashville," he said. "Not a shelter, a medical facility for men who served. They can help you with the things that are making your hands shake, with the sleeping, with all of it." He held Heck's gaze. "I'll take you. Not today if you're not ready, but when you are, I will take you." Heck looked at him for a long moment, long enough that Cole began to think the answer was going to be no, or worse, silence. Then something shifted behind the old man's eyes. Not hope yet, but the first faint possibility of it, the way a pilot light catches and holds before it becomes flame. "Maybe," Heck said slowly, "it's time." Cole nodded. He didn't make it into more than it was. He just nodded, and that was enough. He stood and looked at Slab, who was already organizing the boxes with the efficiency of a man who understood that tasks were sometimes the best way to honor a moment. They loaded everything into the truck while Levi stood and watched, holding the green jacket with both hands, not yet wearing it, as though putting it on required a permission he hadn't been given. "Where do you live?" Cole asked him. "About a mile up the road." Levi gestured north. "Past the grain elevator. We'll take you home. Talk to your mom." The fear came back into Levi's face, immediately sharp and specific. "She's going to be upset. About the lunch. About the school." "She's not going to be upset," Cole said. He said it with the particular certainty of a man who had spent a lifetime reading people and who understood in the way that only people who grew up with very little can fully understand exactly what it meant when a woman got up before dawn to pack a lunch for a child she wouldn't see until midnight. "Trust me," Cole said. Levi looked at him for a moment. Then he put on the jacket. It was a little big on him, the sleeves reaching past his wrists, and he had to roll them twice. But when it settled on his shoulders, something in his posture changed. He stood a little straighter. Not because the jacket had given him anything he didn't already have, but because someone had noticed he was cold and done something about it, and that was its own kind of warmth. Cole watched the boy zip it up and thought about 30 years of road and all the things he'd passed without stopping. He thought about the question he'd asked himself in that parking lot outside Clarksville, in the dark hours before dawn, the one he hadn't been able to answer. He still didn't have the complete answer, but he was beginning to think it lived down here close to the ground, in curbs and overpasses and paper bags, in the careful placement of a sandwich with both hands, in the things that happened between people when no one was watching or when everyone was watching and chose to look the other way. He had looked away for a long time. He had been very good at it. The truck rumbled to life. Slab at the wheel, Stitch and Crow in the bed with the boxes. Cole walked Levi to the passenger side and opened the door. The boy climbed in. Cole walked around and got in last, and before he closed the door, he looked back one more time at Heck Waverly, sitting beneath the overhang in the thin afternoon light, eating the last of what he'd been given. Heck raised one hand. Cole raised his in return. Then he closed the door, and the truck pulled out of the gravel lot onto Route 9, heading north past the grain elevator toward a house where a woman who didn't know what her son had been carrying was about to find out. Cole stared at the road ahead. Levi sat beside him, small inside his new jacket, hands folded in his lap. Neither of them spoke, but between them and the comfortable quiet that sometimes settles between people who have recognized something true in each other, something had already shifted, something that would not shift back. The truck moved through the last of the afternoon. The clouds had broken fully now, and the light that came through them was the particular gold of late October in Tennessee, warm and slanted and brief, the kind that makes you want to hold still and let it land on you before it moves on. Cole let it hit him. He was still noticing. After everything, after 30 years and too many funerals and all the long dark highways in between, he was still noticing. Denny would have had something to say about that. Something that sounded like a joke until you sat with it long enough. Cole thought he knew what it would have been. The house was exactly what Cole had expected, and somehow harder to look at than he'd prepared himself for. It sat at the end of a gravel drive off Route 9 north of the grain elevator, just where Levi had said. A small rental, wood-framed with white paint that had given up in patches, and a porch that tilted slightly toward the yard like it was listening for something underground. The gutters needed attention. One of the shutters hung at an angle that suggested the screw holding it had been loose for a season at least. But the yard was neat, leaves raked into a pile near the fence, a few clay pots along the porch steps with the last of the season's marigolds still holding on, orange and stubborn in the cooling air. Someone cared about this place. They just didn't have enough hours in the day to show it the way they wanted to. Slab pulled the truck to a stop in the drive. The engine ticked down. Nobody moved for a moment. Cole looked at the house, then at Levi, who was staring at the front door with the particular stillness of a child rehearsing for something difficult. "She's going to find out about the lunches," Levi said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Cole said. "And the school?" "Yes." Levi nodded slowly, accepting this, the way people accept things they can't change once they've run out of ways to avoid them. He unclipped his seatbelt and sat another moment with his hands in his lap. "She works so hard," he said almost to himself. "She's going to feel like she failed." Cole turned to look at the boy. "That's not what this is." "She's going to think it is. Maybe at first." Cole kept his voice level. "But not after she thinks about it. Not when she understands what you were doing and why." Levi said nothing. He was still looking at the door. "The thing you were trying to protect her from," Cole said, "is the same thing she was trying to protect you from. You were both doing it at the same time and neither of you knew it. That's not failure. That's just two people who love each other not talking enough." The boy turned and looked at Cole with an expression that was too old for his face. Not cynical, not hurt, just worn the way things get when they've been used past their intended capacity but haven't broken yet. "Okay," Levi said. He opened the truck door and climbed down. Cole followed. Slab and the others stayed near the truck, reading the situation correctly without being told to, because men who had spent years riding together developed a particular fluency in what didn't need to be said. Cole walked up the porch steps behind Levi. The third step creaked badly. The marigolds smelled faintly of something sweet and dry. Levi knocked on his own front door, which told Cole something about the rhythms of this household. A boy who announced himself even in his own home, because his mother had taught him to be considerate in the small things, even when she wasn't there to see it. The door opened. Nora Fitch was younger than Cole had built her in his mind. Early 30s, which meant she'd had Levi when she was barely more than a kid herself. And the math of that, the compressed years, the weight of solo parenthood, before most people had figured out their own lives, showed in her face, not as age, but as a particular kind of alertness. Eyes that moved quickly, a jaw that held a faint tension even in repose. A woman who had learned to scan her environment the way animals do in open country reading for threat and change before either announced themselves. She looked at Levi first, then at Cole. She took a step back, and her hand moved to the doorframe. Cole raised both hands slightly, not all the way. Nothing dramatic, just a small gesture that says, I am not a threat. I see you, I'm not moving fast. He'd learned that gesture in situations that required more careful navigation than this one, but it translated. Ms. Fitch, he said, my name is Cole Harlan. I'm sorry to show up without calling ahead. I don't mean to alarm you. Her eyes went to Levi. Are you okay? Did something happen? I'm okay, Mom. Levi's voice was steady. He helped me. He helped heck. Something crossed Nora's face at that name. A complicated thing, not surprise exactly, but the look of a word being heard in a context it hadn't been heard in before, in a room it hadn't been permitted to enter. Who is heck? She said. Cole exhaled slowly. That's what we came to tell you. She looked at him for a long moment. Behind Cole Slab and the others had stayed by the truck just visible at the end of the porch, and Cole saw Nora take them in four large men in road leather iron ridge patches and absorb the full picture of what was standing on her porch without entirely being able to account for it. She made a decision. Cole could see it happen in real time. She opened the door wider and stepped back. They sat in a small living room that was clean in the way that places get when keeping things clean is a matter of discipline rather than ease. A couch with a blanket folded over one arm with precise corners. A wooden coffee table with a ring stain that had been scrubbed at and reduced but not eliminated. A small television. On the windowsill, three more clay pots with plants that were doing their best. On the wall, a drawing in a dollar store frame. Levi's unmistakably a house with a big yellow sun, the kind every child draws at 6 years old, and that mothers keep long after the child has grown past the age of drawing houses with yellow suns. Cole sat on the edge of the couch. Nora took the chair across from him, perched on the front of it, hands folded in her lap. Levi sat beside Cole, still in his new jacket, which Nora had looked at once without comment. Cole told her everything. He started with the first afternoon at Hatcher's the Brown Bag, the careful ritual, the boy, and the old man, who had arrived at some wordless understanding that Cole had needed 3 days to begin to read. He told her about the hands, about the hollow look. He told her about sitting on the curb and asking Levi a simple question and getting an answer that had stopped him in place. He told her about the suspension, and he watched her face as he said it, and he didn't soften it. He told her about the crackers, about Levi refusing the food, about the exact words the boy had said, because if I don't, he won't eat at all. And he said them plainly because they deserved to be said plainly without softening or ornament. He told her about the phone call Levi had overheard, about the second job, about a 10-year-old doing the arithmetic of his mother's exhaustion in the dark by himself, reaching conclusions no child should have to reach. Nora sat very still through all of it. Her hands stayed folded. Her face moved through things in small, controlled ways. A tightening around the eyes, a shift in her jaw. The kind of grief that well-practiced people keep below the waterline because they have learned that the surface is a working space and cannot be surrendered to falling apart. When Cole finished, the room was quiet. Nora looked at Levi. Levi looked at the floor. I didn't want you to worry, Levi said. Nora made a sound that was not quite a word. She pressed one hand to her mouth. Her eyes filled in a way she clearly hadn't given them permission to do, and she blinked hard once, twice. And then she stopped trying to hold it back, because some things cannot be contained by will alone, and pretending otherwise only delays the inevitable at a cost you pay later with interest. She crossed the room and pulled her son into her arms, and Levi went into that embrace the way a person goes into something they have been waiting for without knowing they were waiting, completely instantly, with no part of himself held back. And the weight that Cole had been watching the boy carry for 3 days came down all at once. Levi's shoulders shook. He didn't make much sound. He cried the way kids cry when they have been trying very hard not to for a very long time, deep and stuttering, his whole small body involved in it, like the grief was finding a way out through every exit available. Cole stood up quietly and moved to the window. He looked out at the yard, the marigolds, the pile of raked leaves. Slab standing by the truck with his arms crossed and his eyes on the sky, the way men stand when they're giving a room its privacy. After a while, when the crying had run its course and settled into the quieter aftermath, Nora spoke. I can't accept charity. Her voice was rougher than it had been, the edges undone, but the structure still holding. I want to be clear about that. I appreciate what you did for Levi and for this heck. I do, but I take care of my son. That's not going to change. Cole turned from the window. He looked at her directly without flinching and without pushing. I'm not offering charity, he said. Then what are you offering? Help. He let the words stand alone for a moment, giving it room. There's a difference, though I understand why it can be hard to feel from the inside. Nora looked at him. She had Levi's hands, or he had hers, that same careful, deliberate quality fingers that looked like they knew how to do things and were used to doing them without help. I don't know you, she said. No, you don't. I don't know why a man I've never met would show up at my son's school and... She stopped. Something shifted in her face. You went to the school yesterday morning. Her eyes narrowed. You went to Millbrook Elementary. Sat in the principal's office for 40 minutes. Cole kept his voice even. Explain the situation. Not all of it. Enough. The suspension's been reversed. Levi's enrolled in the breakfast program starting Monday. The room was very quiet. Nora looked at him for a long time. Cole didn't look away and didn't fill the silence, because the silence was doing necessary work, the kind that can't be rushed. Why, she finally said. Cole thought about how to answer that honestly without making it into more than what it was. He'd been asking himself a version of the same question since the first afternoon at Hatcher's, when he hadn't quite been able to make himself right away. Because somebody needed to, he said, and I was there. It was the simplest version of the truth. Not the complete version. The complete version involved Denny Pruitt in a parking lot in Clarksville and 30 years of moving fast enough to outrun the questions he didn't want to answer. But the simple version was true enough for right now. Nora looked at Levi, who had settled beside her with his head resting against her arm, spent and quieter now. She looked at the boxes Stitch and Crow were carrying up the porch steps. I can't, she started. Ms. Fitch, Cole said, not unkindly. Your son skipped meals so another person could eat. He did it quietly without telling anyone because he didn't want to burden you. He got suspended from school and held that for 3 days because he was trying to protect you. He paused, letting that land. The one thing you can do right now that would honor what he did is let somebody help. Just this once. Just to get level. The room was very still. Nora closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, something had shifted, not defeat, nothing close to it. More like a decision made at some cost, the kind that earns its own quiet dignity. Okay, she said. Just to get level. Cole nodded. That's all. They carried the boxes inside and stacked them in the kitchen. Stitch, who had once reorganized an entire clubhouse kitchen with the efficiency of a man who'd spent 2 years short order cooking, arranged things on the shelves without being asked and without making it look like he was doing anything more than setting boxes down. Crow found a loose hinge on the back door, disappeared to the truck, and came back with a screwdriver. He fixed it without comment and then fixed the creaking porch step while he was at it because it was there and it needed doing. Nora watched all of this from the kitchen doorway with an expression Cole recognized, the expression of someone whose model of the world has just been revised in a direction they hadn't anticipated. Before they left, Slab handed Nora an envelope. There's a number in there, he said. His voice was rough but carefully calibrated, the way large men learn to speak when they want to be trusted rather than feared. Food bank over in Millbrook. Community center runs a program, no paperwork, no income verification, no questions asked. They're good people. You call them when you're ready. Nora took the envelope. She held it in both hands and looked at it for a moment with the expression of someone determining whether a thing is real or whether it will evaporate. Thank you, she said. It cost her something to say it, and Cole respected that. Don't thank us, Slab said. Thank your kid. He started this. They were almost to the truck when the door opened behind them. Cole turned. Levi came off the porch, fast jacket flapping, and wrapped both arms around Cole's waist with the full and unguarded force of a 10-year-old who had run out of every other way to say what he needed to say. Cole stood very still. Then he put his hand on top of the boy's head gently and held it there for a moment. "You take care of yourself," Cole said. "Let people help sometimes. You don't have to carry everything alone." Levi nodded against the leather of his vest. Cole looked up and found Nora standing in the doorway watching. Their eyes met across the porch. She gave a small nod, the kind that contains more than it shows, that has been compressed by necessity and practice. Cole returned it. He walked to the truck. On the ride back, nobody spoke for a while. The road was darkening toward evening, and the fields had gone gray gold, and the heater in the truck ran warm and close. Stitch was looking out the window. Crow had his eyes closed, which didn't mean he was sleeping. Slab drove with both hands on the wheel, which for Slab was the equivalent of being visibly moved. Cole stared at the road ahead and thought about Nora Fitch and her folded hands, and her tilted porch and her stubborn marigolds. He thought about what it took to pack a lunch at 5 in the morning for a child you wouldn't see until midnight, and how that was its own kind of love, compressed and quiet and invisible to everyone but the person receiving it. I thought about Levi carrying that bag every afternoon at 3:15, giving away the evidence of his mother's love, and somehow honoring it in the act of giving it away, trusting that the love would hold even when the food was gone. That was a kind of faith Cole was not sure he'd ever possessed. They stopped at Hatcher's. Heck was still there, which Cole had half expected and half feared. The old man had found a cardboard sheet from somewhere and laid it flat beneath him against the evening cold, and he was sitting with his back against the brick and his knees up and his eyes open, watching the sky go dark over the tree line, with the patience of someone who had learned to find something to look at no matter where he was. Cole sat down beside him. They were quiet for a moment, the two of them. The way men are quiet when they're getting ready to say something real and don't want to arrive at it too fast. "I looked up the VA center in Nashville," Cole said. "They've got a veterans services unit, full intake medical housing assessment, the whole picture. I can get you there this week, whenever you say." Heck looked at the darkening sky. "Long time since I've been inside a government building." "I know. Long time since I've been inside most buildings." A pause. "Don't know how I feel about that." "You don't have to know how you feel about it," Cole said. "You just have to get in the truck." Heck almost smiled. Almost. The corners of his mouth moved and then stopped, like they'd forgotten the full motion, but hadn't entirely forgotten that it existed. "That kid," Heck said after a while. "Levi." "Yeah. First time anybody sat with me regular in—" He trailed off, seemed to do some internal counting, and then gave up on arriving at a number. "I don't know how long, but he just showed up one day with that bag and sat down like it was the most natural thing in the world. Didn't ask me questions, didn't try to fix me." Heck's voice had a gravel in it that wasn't just age. "Just sat there." Cole nodded. "Kid like that," Heck said. "Somebody raised him right." "She's doing her best," Cole said. "Alone." "They usually are," Heck said quietly. "The ones doing it right." Cole looked at the old man's hands resting in his lap. The tremor was still there, but the hands themselves, thick-knuckled, scarred in the particular way that outdoor living scars a man over many years were still capable looking. Like hands that had known how to do things once and had not entirely forgotten the way the body remembers what the mind has tried to put away. "Tell me something," Cole said. "Before all this, before Route 9, what did you do?" Heck was quiet long enough that Cole thought he wasn't going to answer. "Then maintenance, mechanical mostly, vehicles, equipment, whatever needed doing. I was good with engines." He looked down at his hands. "Steady hands for it back then." "That doesn't go away," Cole said. "The knowledge of how to do something, it stays in there." Heck looked at his own hands as if weighing that from the outside, measuring whether it was true or just something a man said. "Maybe," he said. Cole let it rest there. He stayed with Heck until the cold came down in earnest, then drove back to the Iron Ridge clubhouse, alone, taking the long way around the way he did when he needed the road to do the thinking. he couldn't do sitting still. The fields were black against a dark sky. The headlight cut a clean path through it. Back at the clubhouse, the lights were on. The sound of voices, low music, something on the stove that smelled like it had been cooking long enough to mean it. Normal sounds, the sounds of men who had built their own version of home, because most of them had never had one that fully worked and had decided to stop waiting for the kind that was handed to you. Cole came through this door and set his jacket on the chair and stood at the table. Slab, Stitch and Crow, two other brothers, Reel and Ferris, who had been around that evening and had already heard the broad shape of things from Slab. Cole spread his hands flat on the table. I need to talk to all of you, he said. Slab poured coffee. They sat. Cole told them everything this time, not just the facts, but the texture of it. The paper bag, the careful hands, the way Levi had talked about his mother with a tenderness that should have been running the other direction at that age. The school suspension, the overheard phone call, Heck's tattoo and what it represented and what it had cost the man in ways that were still being paid. He talked about Nora's hands, about the marigolds, about the porch step Crow had fixed without being asked to. He talked about Denny, not a lot, just enough. Just the one thing Denny had said, because it was the thing that had been sitting in the center of all of it since Tuesday morning. The room was quiet when he finished. The coffee cooled in the cups. The low music had stopped at some point, and nobody had restarted it. Real a quiet man, a man who chose his moments with the care of someone who understood that words spent freely were worth less than words spent, carefully said, "What do you need?" Cole looked at him, then at the rest of them. There are families like theirs all over this county, Cole said. Not visible, not asking, just getting through. And there's no system catching them before they fall, not fast enough. Not without the kind of paperwork and process that puts people off before they ever walk through a door. He paused. I want to set something up at Hatcher's. A distribution point. Regular. No questions asked. No shame attached. People come, they get what they need, they go home. Slab leaned back in his chair. He looked at Cole with the expression of a man who has known someone long enough to hear everything they're not saying alongside everything they are. You're talking about a regular operation, Slab said. Yes. Food drives, coordination with food banks, probably outreach to churches and local businesses. Yes. Slab looked at the others. They looked back at him. Something passed around the table that wasn't quite a conversation and wasn't quite silence, more like a collective arriving at a shared understanding that had been waiting to be reached. What does the guy at Hatcher's think? Crow asked. I haven't asked him yet, Cole said. I'll ask him tomorrow. Crow nodded. I'll come. So will I, Stitch said. Reel said nothing, but he turned his coffee cup in his hands and nodded once. And from Reel, that was as good as a speech. Slab looked at Cole. The kid started this, Slab said. He did. You're just following where it pointed. Cole looked at the table for a moment. Maybe, he said, or maybe I'm finally going somewhere I should have gone a long time ago. Slab picked up his coffee. Either way, he said, we're going with you. Cole sat in the clubhouse for another hour after the others had gone. He sat alone at the table with his coffee, gone cold, and reached into his vest pocket and pulled out the photograph he'd been carrying since the memorial service. It was an old photograph, shot on film, which meant it had weight and grain in the specific color cast of the mid-90s. Cole and Denny, both younger by decades, standing beside Cole's first bike in a parking lot somewhere in Kentucky. Denny was laughing at something. Cole was half smiling, which was as far as Cole had ever been able to get in photographs. He set the photograph on the table and looked at it. I thought about what Levi had said on the curb at Hatcher's in the voice that was too tired to be anything other than true. Because if I don't, he won't eat at all. The boy hadn't said it as philosophy. He hadn't prepared it. He just said it flat and simple the way you say things when you've stopped having the energy to dress them up. That was the whole of it right there. I have something. Someone else has nothing. The math is obvious. At 10 years old, Levi had been doing that math every day without anyone asking him to, without anyone knowing to ask. Cole picked up the photograph and looked at Denny's face for a long time. Then he said quietly to the empty room, I hear you. He put the photograph back in his pocket. He pulled his jacket on and went out to find his bike. The night air had turned properly cold, the first real cold of the season, and his breath made small shapes in it. He stood in the parking lot and looked up at the sky, which was clear and enormous. The kind of sky you only get when you're far enough from the city lights that the stars can do what they're meant to do. I thought about Levi sleeping in that small house tonight, full for the first time in how long. He thought about Heck under the overhang, with the blanket he'd been left, and the slow, uncertain knowledge that something might be different from here. He thought about Nora Fitch holding an envelope in both hands, trying to determine if it was real. He started the engine. The road was dark and straight and cold ahead of him, and his headlight pushed into it, carving out just enough visibility to move forward. Not the whole road, just the next piece of it. Just enough. For a long time that had felt like not enough. Tonight it felt like plenty. The VA Medical Center in Nashville sat on the west side of the city, a sprawling complex of brick and glass that had been added onto over so many decades. It looked like several different buildings that had gradually agreed to become one. Cole had looked it up the night before the address, the intake process, which entrance to use for veteran services. He liked to know the layout of a place before he walked into it. Old habit. The kind that kept things from going sideways. He pulled up to Hatcher's at 7 in the morning. Heck was already awake. He was sitting on the same piece of cardboard back against the brick, watching the road the way men watch roads when they've spent enough time on them to understand that roads are just time made visible. One long continuous thing that only appears to move because you're moving along it. He had the blanket Cole had left him pulled up around his shoulders, and his breath made small clouds in the cold air. Cole got out of the truck. He'd brought coffee, 2 cups from the diner on Millbrook, the same diner where Nora Fitch worked the morning shift. He'd sat at the counter long enough to drink half of his before having it poured into a to-go cup, and he'd watched the way Nora moved through the room, quick and precise, never wasting motion, always anticipating the next need before it was voiced. She hadn't seen him. He hadn't made himself known. He just watched, and what he saw was a woman who was very good at her work and very tired and doing both things at the same time without making either of them visible. I handed Heck one of the cups. Heck took it with both hands and held it without drinking for a moment, letting the warmth come through the paper, the way you let something good happen to you slowly. How'd you sleep? Cole asked. Same as always, Heck said, which meant not well, but he was used to it, which was its own answer. Cole sat down on the low concrete parking barrier nearby. He drank his coffee. The morning was still gray at the edges, the sun not fully committed yet, and Route 9 was sparse, a few farm trucks, a school bus moving south, a man on a tractor crossing the road, so slowly it seemed as though he might not complete the crossing before the season changed. I made some calls yesterday, Cole said, to the VA Center in Nashville. They have an intake team that works specifically with veterans who've been experiencing housing instability. I talked to a woman named Patricia. She was straightforward about what they could and couldn't do, which I appreciated. He paused. They can help Heck, not just with a roof, with the other things. Heck looked into his coffee. The shaking, Cole said, keeping his voice even and without performance. The sleeping, the things that happen in your head at night that you've been managing alone for 30 years. They have people who have been doing this work a long time and they don't make it into more than it is. Patricia told you all that. She told me enough. Heck was quiet for a moment. A truck went by on the road and the sound of it rose and fell and was gone, swallowed by the morning. Last time I was inside a VA building, he said, was 1994. They gave me a pamphlet and told me to follow up with my primary care provider. A pause. I didn't have one. Things have changed a lot since 1994. Yes, Cole said. They have. Heck looked at him. There was something measuring in it, the way a man looks at another man when he's trying to determine whether what's being offered will hold weight or whether it will collapse. The way things had collapsed before the way things he trusted had collapsed. You'd go with me, Heck said. I'd go with you. Not just drop me off. I'd park the truck and walk in the front door and sit in whatever chair they pointed me at until they were done with you. Cole held his gaze. I've got nowhere else I need to be, heck. That last part was true in a way that Cole hadn't fully understood until he said it out loud. 30 years of riding had given him the freedom to be anywhere, which was another way of saying the freedom to be nowhere in particular. The road asked nothing of you except forward motion, and he had been confusing that with purpose for a very long time. Heck looked at the road for a long moment. Then he folded the blanket carefully, the way someone folds something they plan to return to, and set it on the cardboard and put both hands on his knees. All right, he said. They got in the truck. The drive to Nashville took just over an hour. They didn't talk much, which was fine. The radio was on low, a country station, playing songs that were old enough to feel like memory, and the highway opened up past the county line and gave them long, flat stretches where the sky was the most significant thing visible. Cole drove and let the miles do their work and didn't try to prepare Heck for anything or manage the experience into something more comfortable. Heck sat with his hands in his lap and watched the landscape pass, and occasionally the tremor in his fingers would settle, and occasionally it wouldn't. About 40 minutes in, Heck said, I had a '78 Chevy pickup once. Rebuilt the engine myself. Took me all winter. That's good work, Cole said. It was. A pause. Sold it when things got bad. Needed the cash. Another pause, longer this time. Still think about that truck sometimes. Cole nodded. Stupid thing to think about, Heck said. No, it isn't. They were quiet again after that, but the quality of the quiet had shifted. It had opened up a little the way a room opens up when a window is cracked. At one point, about 20 minutes out from Nashville, Heck said something that Cole had been waiting for without knowing he was waiting. I had a daughter, Heck said. He said it the way you say things you've been carrying in the sealed compartment of yourself for so long that saying them out loud feels strange, like speaking in a language you used to know. Her name was Rebecca, after my mother. He paused. She'd be about 28 now, I think. Last I heard, she was going into nursing. This was a long time ago. Another pause. She was living somewhere outside Nashville. Don't know if that's still true. Cole looked at the road ahead. Does she know where you are? Cole asked. No. Heck was quiet for a moment. I didn't want her to see me like this. Figured she was better off thinking I was just gone. He stopped. Figured she probably had. Stop thinking about it, I mean. Stop thinking about me. Cole said nothing. He drove and let Heck have the space of it. I think about her every year, Heck said. Think about finding her. Then I decide I don't have the right. He looked out the window. 20 years of that. Cole filed this away carefully, the way you file away something you know you're going to need but can't use yet. The VA center was everything Cole had hoped and none of what he'd feared. Patricia met them at the intake desk, a compact woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain, and the manner of someone who had been doing this work long enough to have encountered every version of resistance and every version of the moment resistance gives way. She shook Heck's hand first, not Cole's, which was the right call, and Cole respected her for it immediately. She did not make anything into more than it was. She asked questions in the flat, practical tone of someone building a picture rather than performing concern. She was interested in facts, dates, locations, duration, symptoms, and she collected them without reacting to them, which seemed to be exactly what Heck needed. He answered her questions in short sentences at first, then longer ones, and by the third form he'd been handed, he was speaking in paragraphs. Cole sat in the chair against the wall and let it happen without inserting himself. At one point, a younger man came out from a back hallway, mid-30s, short hair, the particular upright posture of someone who had spent time in uniform, and sat down beside Heck and talked to him quietly for a few minutes, in the way that people talk when they've been to the same dark places and understand the language without it needing to be translated. Cole watched Heck's face during that conversation. He watched the careful, measuring expression give way slowly to something earlier than relief. The first recognition that being understood was actually possible. They were there for 4 hours. When it was done, Heck had an appointment for medical assessment the following week, a referral to a therapeutic program specializing in veterans with long-term PTSD, and a placement at a transitional housing facility 3 miles from the medical center. A clean room meals included support staff on site, not permanent, but solid. The kind of solid that could become something else given enough time and the right conditions. Cole drove him there to see it before they left the city. It was a low building on a tree-lined street, the kind of place that had been built with enough intention that you could feel it in the proportions wide hallways. Good light, a common room with chairs that were actually designed to be comfortable rather than to fill space. The man who showed them around had a Gulf War pin on his jacket lapel and called Heck by his last name Waverly, with the particular gravity of someone who understood what that name had carried. Heck stood in the doorway of the room that would be his and looked at it for a long time. It was small and plain, a bed with clean sheets, a dresser with a mirror, a window that looked out onto a courtyard where two older men sat at a concrete chess table in the afternoon light. The game between them unhurried. Nothing special, everything necessary. Tuesday, Heck said. It was the day he could move in once the paperwork completed its course. I'll drive you, Cole said. Heck nodded. He stood a moment longer in the doorway looking at the room that would be his. Then he stepped back out into the hallway, and Cole pulled the door shut, and they walked back to the truck in the silence of two men who had done something together that neither of them would turn into a larger story than it was. On the drive back, Heck fell asleep in the passenger seat. His head tilted against the headrest, and his hands lay still in his lap. And for the first time since Cole had known him, the tremor was almost entirely gone. Cole drove with unusual care, taking the curves wider than necessary, keeping the ride smooth, and glanced over occasionally at the sleeping man with a feeling he recognized as satisfaction. But that was also something quieter, more like the feeling of having been in exactly the right place and done the right thing and not talked yourself out of it before it could happen. He stopped at Hatcher's to drop Heck for his last few nights before Tuesday. Old Pete Hatcher, the owner, was out front sweeping the lot when Cole pulled in, moving the broom in steady passes across the gravel with the methodical quality of a man who swept, not because the lot would stay clean, but because the act of sweeping was itself the point. Cole got out of the truck and walked over, and Pete Hatcher looked at him the way he always looked at Cole. A complicated look, not hostile but not at ease. The look of a man with opinions about what belonged where, and who was not entirely sure what category Cole occupied. Cole told Pete about Levi. He kept it simple and he kept it true, and he watched Pete's face move through resistance and discomfort, and then into something slower and less defended, the way faces move when they're being opened by something they didn't prepare for. He told Pete what he wanted to do with the lot on Saturday mornings. A distribution point. Organized. Clean. No inconvenience to the business. If anything, the traffic might bring people in who hadn't stopped before. Pete swept the same 3 feet of gravel for a long time without saying anything. Then he said, "My brother lived on the street for 2 years before he died. Not here. Up in Indiana." He kept sweeping the motion unchanged. "I never went to see him." Cole said nothing. "I told myself it was complicated," Pete said. "There was always a reason. The timing, the distance, whatever came up." He stopped sweeping. He looked at the broom in his hands like he was just noticing he was holding it. "He died in February. Cold snap. They found him under an overpass on I-65. Cole stood still. Pete looked up. His face had something in it that had been living there a long time and hadn't had anywhere to go. "You can use the lot," Pete said. "Saturday mornings. I'll put out the tables myself." Cole said, "Thank you, Pete." Pete went back to sweeping. The first Saturday came faster than Cole had expected. The way things move when people have committed to them and the logistics are already in motion because the right people are doing them. Slab had coordinated with the county food bank with a thoroughness that surprised no one who knew him. Stitch had called 3 local churches, and 2 had said yes immediately, and the third had said they'd pray about it, and called back the next day to say yes, which was good enough. Crow had sourced 2 folding tables and a pop-up canopy from somewhere he declined to specify, which was also good enough. By 8 in the morning, the Hatcher's lot had more activity than it had probably seen in years. The Iron Ridge brothers moved through it with the quiet efficiency of men who were accustomed to organizing themselves around a task without extended discussion. Boxes were unloaded and sorted. A table for dry goods, one for canned goods, one for the bread, and Produce a bakery on Millbrook had donated after Real stopped in and had a conversation with the owner. The canopy went up over the center of it all, and Pete Hatcher came out with a folding chair and a thermos of coffee and sat near the door and watched the whole enterprise occupy his parking lot with an expression that was working hard not to be moved. People came, not a flood at first. A few cars in the first hour, parking at the edge of the lot, the occupants sitting inside for a moment before getting out, that particular hesitation of people who need help and have not yet made peace with needing it. Cole had anticipated this and positioned himself not behind the tables, but near the entrance to the lot, standing easy jacket open. Nothing in his hands. Just a person who was there. Just someone to make eye contact with first to establish that nobody was watching too closely or cataloging anything. A woman in her 40s came first, two kids at her heels. She took what she needed and thanked Stitch twice, and he nodded both times without elaborating. An older man in a truck with a cracked windshield. A young couple who'd been having a long year. A woman who arrived on foot with a canvas bag, who took a loaf of bread and a can of soup and a handful of crackers, said nothing left, saying nothing. And Cole watched her go and thought about dignity and how it was not the opposite of need and never had been. By 10 o'clock, the lot had found its rhythm. Nora Fitch arrived at 10:15. She pulled in a car that needed a new muffler parked near the back and sat in it for a moment. Cole saw her through the windshield. He didn't go to her, he waited. She got out. Levi was with her, and the boy went immediately toward the tables with the orientation of someone who already knew the geography, which he did. Cole had asked him where things should go the evening before, treating the boy's judgment as though it mattered, which it did. Nora walked to where Cole was standing near the entrance. "He told me about this last night," she said. "He was very proud." "He should be," Cole said. "None of this happens without him." Nora looked at the lot, at the tables, at Levi, who was helping an elderly woman lift a box of pasta, his arms positioned the way Crow had shown him, careful and precise. Something in her face had changed from the last time Cole had seen it. The bracing was still there. Nora Fitch would always be braced because the world had shown her that bracing was what kept things standing, but something around the eyes had eased. She was holding herself differently, less like someone waiting for the next impact. "I called that food bank number," she said. "The one on the card slab left." "Good. They were decent about it." A pause. "They asked if I wanted to volunteer as well as receive. I said yes." Cole nodded. "I'm good at organizing things," Nora said. No self-consciousness in it. Just a statement of fact from a woman who had spent years organizing the chaos of an insufficient life into something that worked. If this is going to be regular, it needs someone who can manage inventory and coordinate pickups and keep track of what people actually need week to week instead of just guessing at it. Cole looked at her. "Are you offering?" he said. "I'm telling you what would make it work better." A pause. "And yes, I'm offering." Cole said, "Then yes." They stood together for a moment, watching the lot, watching Levi hand a box to the elderly woman and say something that made her laugh, a real laugh, surprised out of her, the kind that doesn't get performed. "He's eating," Nora said quietly. "I can tell. 3 pounds in 2 weeks." She said it with the precision of someone who had weighed him herself and would not have admitted to doing so if not for this. "He doesn't know I checked." Cole said nothing. He let her have that. "Thank you," Nora said. She said it differently than she had before, not with the stiffness of someone accepting something against their nature, but with the directness of a woman who meant exactly what she said and had stopped dressing it up. "Don't thank me," Cole said. "Look at your kid." She looked at her kid. Cole left her to it. In the early afternoon, between the first wave of families and the second, Cole drove out to the transitional housing facility on the tree-lined street in Nashville and picked up Heck, who was packed and waiting in the common room with a canvas bag that held everything he owned. They drove back on Tuesday as promised. Heck moved into his room in 20 minutes because 20 minutes was all it required. Cole helped him make the bed, which Heck did with the neat precision of a man who had learned to make a bed a certain way in a certain context and had not forgotten the habit even when everything else had come undone. When the bed was made and the canvas bag was unpacked and the room was arranged as much as it was going to be, they stood in it for a moment, the two of them, and Cole looked at the window with the courtyard view where the chess players were at it again in the afternoon light. You going to be okay? Cole asked. Heck considered the question seriously, which was the right way to consider it. I don't know, he said, but I think I might find out. Cole drove back to the county. It was 3 weeks later on a Thursday afternoon that had turned warm the way October sometimes surprises you with a last gift before the cold arrives for good, that Cole drove alone to Nashville. Not to the VA Center, to Vanderbilt University Medical Center on the other side of the city. He parked in the visitor lot and walked to the main entrance and asked at the front desk for the nursing staff directory, and the woman told him that wasn't something they provided for public inquiries. He said he understood and thanked her and walked out. He sat in the truck and thought for a minute. Then he drove to the staff parking area and parked across the street and waited, because there are things you cannot get from a system that the world will show you if you're patient enough. He was getting good at patience lately. It was a skill he had previously confused with passivity, and he understood now that they were not the same thing at all. He saw her at 10 minutes past 4. I knew her by her walk, which was something he hadn't anticipated knowing. But she moved like heck, that same measured deliberateness, nothing wasted, everything going somewhere specific. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe 27 or 28, wearing scrubs under an open jacket. Dark hair pulled back, carrying a canvas bag over one shoulder, and moving through the parking lot with the contained efficiency of someone at the end of a long shift who still has things to do. Cole got out of the truck. Rebecca Waverly. She stopped, turned. Her face moved through the usual sequence: surprise, the quick assessment, caution. I'm not here to cause any trouble, Cole said. He kept both hands visible and his voice steady. My name is Cole Harlan. I know your father. The sequence on her face stopped at a place he hadn't predicted. Not fear and not hostility, but the absolute stillness of someone receiving information they have been preparing to receive for a very long time, without knowing that's what they were doing. The stillness of a door that has been locked from the inside for years and has just heard a knock it didn't know whether to expect. She said, "Is he okay?" Cole said, "He's trying to be." Rebecca Waverly stood in the hospital parking lot in her scrubs and her open jacket and put one hand over her mouth and cried. Not loudly, without drama, with the full interior force of someone who had been managing something in the sealed compartment of themselves that they told themselves was resolved and now understood was not resolved, but was alive and had been alive the entire time waiting. Cole stood where he was. He did not move toward her or away from her. He let her have the moment without filling it. When it passed, she wiped her face with the back of her hand and looked at him with eyes that were very direct. I didn't go looking for him, she said. I told myself it was because he didn't want to be found. But that was... She stopped. That was easier than the truth. What was the truth? That I didn't know what I'd say. She looked at the pavement between them. I was 8 when my mom left. I didn't understand what was happening to him. I just knew he was different. Far away. Not because he was dangerous. Because he was somewhere I couldn't reach him. And I kept reaching anyway until I stopped, and then I spent years being angry at myself for stopping. Cole said he thinks he doesn't have the right to be found. Rebecca looked up. He hasn't said those exact words, Cole said, but it's in everything he doesn't say. He talks about you in the past tense, like you're already gone. He held her gaze. You're not gone. He's not gone. There's still time if you want to use it. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, working through something. Does he know you're here? She asked. No. Does he know you were going to come? No. She considered that. You just came. I just came. She looked at him for a long time, this large, quiet man in road-worn leather who had appeared in a hospital parking lot with no prior arrangement and no guarantee, because a thing needed doing and he was there. When can I see him? She said. Cole said, now if you want. She looked at her car. then at Cole's truck. "I'll follow you," she said. They drove across Nashville in the early evening. Rebecca's small blue car in Cole's rearview mirror, the whole way steady and close. Cole drove carefully, signaling well in advance, keeping her in sight. The city moved around them, the Cumberland River catching the last of the light. The bridges, the particular horizontal gold that brick holds at the end of a day, and then narrowed again on the west side toward the tree-lined street. Cole parked in front of the facility. Rebecca pulled in behind him. They walked to the front door together. Cole stopped at the entrance. "I'll wait here," he said. Rebecca looked at him. "You're not coming in." "This isn't mine," Cole said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded in a way that said she understood not just the practical thing he was saying, but the larger thing under it, that some moments belong to the people in them and to no one else. That bearing witness and being present are not the same thing. That a man who understood the difference understood something essential about what it meant to care about someone without needing to own the outcome. She went in. Cole sat on the low bench near the entrance and looked at the courtyard through the fence where the chess table sat empty now in the fading evening light. He sat there for a long time, 40 minutes, maybe longer. He didn't check his watch. When the door opened, Rebecca had been crying again, but differently, the kind that comes after rather than before, the kind that does not announce emergency but release. She sat down on the bench beside Cole and looked at her hands for a moment. "He said he thought about looking for me too," she said quietly. "Every year. He said every year he'd think about it and then decide he didn't have the right." She paused. 20 years of that. Cole said nothing. "He looks like my grandfather," she said. "That was the first thing I thought. He looks so much like my grandfather." She looked at Cole. "He told me about Levi, about the food, about all of it." A pause. "He said a boy he barely knew sat with him every day just because. And then a man he'd never met drove him to Nashville and sat in a hallway for 4 hours." Cole shifted on the bench. "The boy did that," Cole said. "Not me. He said you'd say something like that." Cole almost smiled. Rebecca straightened her back with a gesture that was unmistakably the exact posture of someone pulling themselves upright after something heavy, using the spine as the first point of recovery. "I'm going to come back on Saturday," she said, "and the Saturday after that." "Good," Cole said. "I want to meet Levi," she said. "If that's all right." Cole stood. "Come to Hatcher's Gas and feed on Route 9 on Saturday morning," he said. "Bring your appetite and an extra pair of hands." She stood too. She looked at him for a moment in the way people look when they're trying to understand what they're looking at. "Why did you do all this?" she asked. Cole gave the question the time it deserved. "A boy I know gave away everything he had every day because he thought it was the right thing to do," Cole said. "I figured the least I could do was try to be half that brave." She held his gaze for a moment longer, then she walked to her car. Cole drove back to the county alone. The long way window cracked to let the cold air in his thoughts moving through him without forcing. The highway gave him the dark miles and the stars were out in full. Now the sky, the enormous unobstructed kind, you only get far enough from city light. And he drove through it without hurrying, carrying 2 pieces of paper in his vest pocket, the photograph of Denny and the empty space beside it, where something else would eventually go. A year later, Cole would try to reconstruct the sequence of what happened between that evening and what came after, and he would find that it didn't resolve into a clean linear progression. It was more like a thing that grew in multiple directions simultaneously. The distribution point at Hatcher's became permanent, and then became known word passing through the county in the unhurried way that genuinely useful things spread, and families came from 3 counties who had been getting by on less than they needed and had not known where to bring that fact. Nora Fitch organized it with a methodical thoroughness that turned what had started as well-intentioned chaos into something that actually worked, and the food bank eventually hired her part-time to coordinate their rural outreach program, which was a better use of her mind and her hours than cleaning offices at 11 o'clock at night. Levi grew, not just in the physical way though, that too, the hollow look filled in, and he got 2 inches taller and the scrub white sneakers were replaced. He grew in the other the way that matters more. He started showing up on Saturdays to help at the distribution point, and he brought two boys from school who became three, who became four, and they operated as a small, self-organized team that needed very little supervision and no praise to keep going, because they had been watching the adults around them and had absorbed the essential lesson by osmosis. You show up, you do the work, you don't make it about yourself. Heck Waverly moved from transitional housing to a small apartment on the west side of Nashville after 8 months. His treatment was neither fast, nor simple, nor linear, but it was working in the way real things work slowly, unevenly, with setbacks that didn't erase the progress made. His hands steadied. He began working part-time at the VA center doing maintenance, and the supervisor said in 30 years he had never seen anyone take better care of a machine. Rebecca came on Saturdays when her shifts allowed. She and Heck were learning each other again in the careful way of people who have lost time and understand that rushing will not recover it, that what's available is the present and what you choose to do with it. Cole saw them together at Hatcher's one morning in late winter, standing near Pete's truck, not saying much, just standing close in the way people stand, when proximity is the thing they've been missing, and he looked away quickly because some things are private, and he had learned the difference. Pete Hatcher put out the tables himself every Saturday morning now without being asked. He told anyone who came into the store during the week that the lot on Saturday mornings was for neighbors full stop. And he said it with the straightforwardness of a man who had made a decision and was done being complicated about it. The morning the school held its annual community recognition ceremony, Cole sat in the back row of the gymnasium. Tom hadn't planned to come. Nora had mentioned it in passing, and he'd said he'd try to make it, which was his usual answer when he wasn't certain. And then the morning came and he found himself in the parking lot of Millbrook Elementary with his jacket on and the simple fact of nowhere more important to be. The gymnasium smelled the way gymnasiums always smell: floor wax and accumulated years, and the particular closeness of a room holding more young people than it was quite designed for. Folding chairs in rows, a podium with a hand-painted banner, parents with phones held at face level, teachers seated along the wall with the patient expressions of people who had attended many of these and had learned to find meaning in the repetition. Levi received the Young Citizen of the Year award for the school district, and Cole watched him walk to the podium with the same purposeful economy. His mother walked with the same quality of knowing exactly where you're going without announcing it as a feature. Levi stood at the microphone. He held the certificate in both hands. He looked at it for a moment, then set it on the podium and looked out at the room. He didn't read from anything. He hadn't prepared anything to read. "I didn't do anything special," Levi said. His voice was steady and clear, the same voice he'd had on the curb at Hatcher's when he'd been too tired to dress anything up. "I just didn't want Heck to be hungry alone, because nobody should be hungry alone." The room was quiet in the particular way it gets when a large number of people are listening to the same thing at the same time, and all of them know it. "There's a man named Cole who stopped one day because he noticed," Levi said. "Most people just kept driving. He stopped." A pause. "I think that's the whole thing, actually. I think that's what all of it is. Whether you stop or whether you don't." Cole was in the back row. He felt Slab sitting beside him go very still. He felt the weight of the room receiving what this boy was saying and taking it seriously the way things said plainly and without agenda tend to be taken seriously by people who have been waiting for plainness without knowing they were waiting. He reached into the inside pocket of his vest. The photograph was there. Denny's laughing face in the mid-90s colors and the Kentucky parking lot where two men had stood beside a motorcycle and not yet understood how much time they were moving through. Cole held the photograph without looking at it. He didn't need to look at it to see it. "I thought about Denny." He didn't repeat the words to himself. He knew them well enough by now that they lived in him like a heartbeat present without being announced, doing their work without needing to be named. He had nearly gone. Not in any single dramatic way, but in the slow accumulative drift of a man who kept moving, because movement meant he didn't have to ask what he was moving toward. The long erosion of a man who had kept every door locked and called it discipline, and only now understood what had been locked out, along with everything he tried to protect. He had been brought back by a 10-year-old with a paper bag and a warm sandwich, in the simple, undecorated understanding that if you have something and someone else has nothing, the math is obvious. Cole put the photograph back in his pocket. At the podium, Levi picked up his certificate. He looked out over the room one more time and his eyes found Cole in the back row with the unerring accuracy of a kid who knows exactly where to look. And he held up the certificate slightly, a small gesture almost imperceptible, entirely private. Cole raised his chin. Just barely. Just enough. Levi stepped back from the podium. After the ceremony in the parking lot, Levi ran out ahead of Nora and came to where Cole was standing near his bike. He was holding something, a folded piece of paper slightly crumpled at the edges, the way things get when they've been carried in a jacket pocket for a while. I made this a couple weeks ago, he said. I kept forgetting to give it to you. Cole took it. He unfolded it carefully, taking the same care with it that Levi had taken with every sandwich he'd ever placed beside Heck Waverly. It was a drawing. A motorcycle clearly Cole's rendered with the confident stylization of a 10-year-old who had been paying close attention. Beside it, one hand resting on the shoulder of a smaller figure. Above them both in block letters that had been gone over twice to give them weight, heroes don't always wear capes. Cole stood in the Millbrook Elementary parking lot in the gray November light in his road-worn vest, in his gray threaded beard, and looked at this drawing for a long time. His throat did something that he did not try to manage. He folded the drawing with the same care he gave the photograph and put them together in the same pocket of his vest. The old image in the new one. 30 years in a boy's hand and everything that lived in between. I'm keeping this, he said. His voice came out rougher than usual. Forever. Levi grinned, and the whole face kind, the kind that used absolutely everything he had. Nora came out behind him and put her hand on his shoulder, and she looked at Cole and said nothing, because there was nothing that needed saying. And Cole looked back at her and thought about marigolds stubborn in October, and lunches packed before dawn, and a woman who had raised a child to understand, without being told, that the world's hunger was a shared problem and not someone else's responsibility. He walked to his bike. He rode out of the parking lot onto the county road and opened the throttle up to where the wind stopped being ambient and became a presence. The way it did at speed, the closest thing to being fully washed clean that Cole had ever found the road's particular version of grace. The fields were bare now, winter pale, the sky enormous and white above them. Route 9 ran straight through the middle of it all, unchanged, the same road. It had always been the road that had brought him to Hatcher's on a gray Tuesday morning when his back ached from a long ride, and his mind was full of Denny Pruitt and 30 years of questions he couldn't answer. He rode past Hatcher's. He slowed down the way he always did now. The lot was quiet today. Pete's truck was out front. The single pump stood in the pale winter light. The old bench sat beside the door, its short legs shimmied now with a piece of folded rubber that Crow had cut and fitted on a Tuesday afternoon 3 months ago. A small repair that had been made because it was there, and it needed doing, and that was reason enough. The lot was empty. The curb was empty. There was nobody beneath the overhang. There hadn't been since October. Cole looked at the empty curb anyway, the way you look at a place where something important happened and you want to mark it, carry it forward. Keep the location known to yourself even after the visible evidence has moved on. He looked at the space where a boy had placed a sandwich and an apple in a juice box with both hands, making sure the transfer was complete, making sure the care and the giving was part of the gift itself. He sat on his idling bike for a moment. Then he straightened up and put the throttle down and let Route 9 carry him forward into the white winter light, in the cold, clean air, and whatever came next, carrying 2 pieces of paper in his vest pocket, one old and one new, and the knowledge which he would not lose again, that the day you stop noticing is the day you're already gone. He was still noticing. He was still here. That was enough. That was everything. That was the whole long road.